He watched her from across the rain-slicked street, briefcase in hand, heart pounding in a way no boardroom had ever made him feel. And by the time he understood why, his entire world had already begun to crack. Elena Ruiz was 27 years old, and every single day of her life was built around one unshakable truth. Dignity could not be taken, only given away. She wore it like armor beneath her burgundy uniform, the one with the crisp white apron that never stayed clean past noon, the one she scrubbed by hand every night because the laundromat cost too much. She'd been cleaning the Harper estate for 3 years, moving through marble hallways and rooms larger than the apartment she shared with her younger sister, and she'd never once let herself imagine what it might feel like to stay. That was her private fear, the one she buried deep beneath every polite smile and every perfectly folded towel, that one day she might forget the difference between working in a beautiful place and deserving to be there. The city woke slowly that autumn, wrapped in gray light and the smell of wet pavement. Elena's mornings always started the same way. She'd rise at 5, boil water for instant coffee, leave a note for Sophia reminding her to eat breakfast, and catch the first bus toward the north side where old money lived behind iron gates and trimmed hedges. She carried a small leather notebook in her apron pocket, a gift from her mother years ago, back when her mother still recognized her. And sometimes when the house was empty and quiet, she'd write down things she noticed, the way light fell through stained glass, the scent of lemon oil on oak, the silence that only money could buy. She never wrote about him. James Calloway was 41, and he'd spent the better part of 2 decades believing that control was the same thing as happiness. He ran an investment firm his father had built, lived in a house his grandfather had designed, and measured his life in quarterly earnings and calculated risks. People called him brilliant, ruthless, fair but cold. He'd learned early that sentiment was a liability, that compassion without strategy was just waste, and he'd built an empire on that philosophy. But lately something had started to fray inside him, a thread he couldn't name, pulling tighter every time he walked through his own front door and felt nothing. He noticed Elena the way you notice a painting you've passed 100 times but never really seen. It was a Tuesday. He'd come home early, headache drilling behind his eyes, and found her in the library, carefully wiping dust from the spines of books he'd never read. She was humming something soft and unfamiliar, and when she realized he was there, the humming stopped. She apologized. He told her it was fine. She went back to work, and he stood there longer than he should have, watching the way her hands moved, precise, gentle, respectful of things that didn't belong to her. That night, he couldn't remember the tune, but he couldn't stop trying. Elena had a routine, and routines were survival. She started on the 3rd floor, guest bedrooms no one used, closets full of clothes with tags still attached, then worked her way down, bathrooms, kitchen, living spaces. She moved like water, efficient and invisible, and she preferred it that way. The less she was noticed, the safer she felt. But over the weeks, she began to sense a shift. Mr. Calloway was home more often. He'd appear in doorways, ask polite questions about her day, offer her coffee she always declined. She didn't know what to do with his attention. It felt too much like standing under a spotlight she hadn't auditioned for. One morning in late October, she found an envelope on the kitchen counter with her name written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a check, double her usual pay, and a note that read, "Thank you for taking care of things I've neglected." She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it, put it back, and left it on the counter. When he came home that evening, the envelope was exactly where he'd left it. "You didn't take it," he said, finding her in the hallway, arms full of folded linens. "It was too much," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "It's what your work is worth." "No," she said quietly. "It's what you think guilt is worth." The silence that followed was so sharp it could have drawn blood. He didn't know why her words landed like that, but they did. She excused herself, finished her tasks, and left 20 minutes early. He sat in his study staring at the envelope, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to shame. That's when he started wondering about her. Not in the way powerful men often wonder about women who work for them, not with appetite or entitlement, but with something closer to curiosity, maybe even concern. She was always calm, always composed, but there was a guardedness in her that reminded him of a locked door. He wanted to know what was behind it. He told himself it was because he valued good employees. He told himself a lot of things that weren't quite true. The day he decided to follow her, he didn't plan it. He'd been leaving the office late, stuck in traffic on the edge of the financial district, when he saw her waiting at a bus stop. She was still in her uniform, coat pulled tight against the wind, and she looked so small standing there under the flickering streetlight that something in him twisted. He told his driver to hang back. He told himself he just wanted to make sure she got home safe. He told himself he'd turn around any second, but he didn't. The bus took her south into neighborhoods where the buildings leaned close together and the streets were cracked and loud. She got off near a narrow apartment complex, the kind with bars on the windows and graffiti on the mailboxes, and walked 2 blocks to a ground floor unit. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and for a moment before the lights came on, he saw her shoulders drop. Just a little, just enough to show how much weight she'd been carrying. He sat in the car for another 10 minutes, feeling like a trespasser, feeling like a fool. He didn't follow her again, but he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. The distance between his world and hers wasn't just geography. It was a chasm, and he'd spent his whole life on the safe side of it, never once looking down. Around Thanksgiving, Elena's sister got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad flu, but Sophia was only 19 and still in school, and Elena couldn't afford to miss work to stay home with her. She came in pale and distracted, moving through the house like a ghost. James noticed. He always noticed now, though he wasn't sure when that had started. "Is everything all right?" he asked, catching her in the kitchen. She hesitated. "Then because exhaustion makes liars of us all," she told him. "Just the basics. Nothing dramatic." "Take the day off," he said. "Paid. Go take care of your sister." She looked at him like he'd just spoken another language. "I can't." "Yes, you can. I'm telling you to." Her eyes filled just for a second before she blinked it away. "Thank you," she whispered. She left, and he stood there in the empty house, wondering when he'd become the kind of man who needed to be thanked for basic decency. That was the moment everything started to shift, though neither of them knew it yet. He began looking for small ways to make her life easier, adjusting her schedule when she needed it, stocking the kitchen with food she actually liked, fixing the broken heater in the staff bathroom that had been ignored for months. He told himself he'd do it for anyone, but he wouldn't have. He knew that. Elena felt the changes, and they terrified her. Kindness from men like him always came with a price. She'd learned that young, watching her mother clean houses for families who smiled and tipped, and never once saw her as fully human. She didn't want to owe James Calloway anything. Owing people made you small. But she also couldn't deny that his attention felt different. There was no expectation in it, no demand, just care. And that scared her more than anything, because caring meant exposure, and exposure meant risk. By December, they'd fallen into a strange, unspoken rhythm. He'd leave coffee for her in the mornings, made the way she liked it, even though she'd never told him. She'd leave notes when things needed fixing, written in her careful handwriting, and he'd handle them within days. They'd talk sometimes, brief conversations that felt longer than they were, about nothing and everything. Books, weather, the city. He learned that she loved old movies, that she was saving for her sister's college, that she missed her mother but couldn't visit often because the memory care facility was 2 hours away. She learned that he was lonely in a way money couldn't fix, that he'd never been in love, that he sometimes stood in his own house and felt like a stranger. One afternoon just before Christmas, she found him sitting on the floor of his study, surrounded by files and spreadsheets, head in his hands. "Mr. Calloway?" He looked up, startled. "I didn't hear you come in. Are you all right?" He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Honestly, I don't know. I've spent my whole life building something I don't even want." She set down her cleaning supplies and, after a moment's hesitation, sat down across from him. Not close, just present. "Then why do you keep building it?" she asked. "Because it's all I know how to do." She thought about that. Then she said, "My mother used to tell me that the hardest thing in the world is to stop doing something you're good at even when it's killing you. He met her eyes, and for the first time he felt seen. What happened to her? He asked gently. Early onset dementia. She's 49, and most days she doesn't know my name. I'm sorry. Me too. They sat there in the quiet, two people from different worlds, sharing the same kind of grief. That night after she left, James made a decision. He didn't know what it meant yet, or where it would lead. But he knew he couldn't keep living the way he had been. Something had to change, and maybe it had already started. What would you have done in this moment? Stayed silent and safe, or risked everything for the chance that someone might actually understand? The week between Christmas and New Year's was always strange in the Calloway house. Too quiet, too aware of itself. James usually spent it working, but this year he couldn't focus. He kept thinking about Elena, about the way she'd looked at him in his study, like he was a person instead of a paycheck. He wanted to do something for her, something meaningful, not transactional, but he didn't know how without crossing a line. Then he remembered the notebook. He'd seen her writing in it once, months ago, tucked into a corner of the sunroom when she thought no one was around. He'd asked what she was working on, and she'd gone red, stammered something about recipes and tucked it away. But he'd glimpsed enough to know it wasn't recipes. It was stories, observations, little sketches of the world as she saw it. He knew a publisher, a small press, independent, always looking for fresh voices. He also knew it was presumptuous, maybe even invasive, to interfere. But the idea wouldn't let go. On the morning of December 30th, he left a package on the kitchen counter. Inside was a leather-bound journal, nicer than the one she carried, but not ostentatious, and a handwritten note. Your words deserve a better home. If you ever want someone to read them, I know people who would listen. No pressure, no strings, just an offer. Got to rub. When she found it, she stood very still for a long time. Then she sat down at the counter and cried. No one had ever taken her seriously like that. No one had ever imagined she might be more than what she did for a living. And James Calloway, who barely knew her, had seen something in her she'd been afraid to see in herself. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did what she always did when emotions got too big. She folded them up small, tucked them away, and got back to work. But the journal stayed in her bag, and that night, for the first time in months, she wrote, January arrived cold and unforgiving. Elena's hours had been cut, not by James, but by the agency that employed her. Budget adjustments, they said. She'd have to pick up another house or two to make up the difference. She didn't tell James. She didn't want him to feel responsible, but the exhaustion started to show. She moved slower, smiled less, forgot things. He noticed. Of course he noticed. You're working too much, he said one morning, watching her scrub the same counter twice. I'm fine. Elena. The sound of her name in his voice, gentle, concerned, made her stop. I need the hours, she admitted quietly. They cut my schedule. I'm picking up extra work. Where? A few places. It's fine. I'll manage. Let me help. No. Why not? She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes was so fierce it startled him. Because I don't want to owe you, she said. Because kindness from men like you always costs something, and I can't afford the price. He felt that like a punch. What if it doesn't? He asked. What if I'm just trying to help because I care about you? The silence stretched thin and fragile between them. Why? She whispered. Why would you care about me? Because you're the only real thing in my life. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and unguarded, and the moment they landed, he knew he couldn't take them back. Elena stared at him, heart hammering, mind racing. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But belief was dangerous. Belief was how you got hurt. I have to go, she said. And before he could respond, she was gone. She didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. James called the agency. They said she'd requested a schedule change. He tried her phone. No answer. He thought about going to her apartment, but stopped himself. That would be too much, too invasive. So he waited, sick with worry and regret, wondering if he'd ruined everything. On the 5th day, she showed up. She looked tired, worn, but she was there. "I'm sorry," she said before he could speak. "I needed time to think. I'm the one who should apologize. I shouldn't have said, 'You meant it, didn't you?'" He swallowed hard. "Yes." She nodded slowly, like she was absorbing a truth too big to hold all at once. "I don't know what to do with that," she admitted. "I don't know how to be around you now." "Then let me show you," he said quietly. "No expectations, no pressure, just let me be in your life, however you'll let me." She looked at him for a long time. Then so softly he almost missed it, she said, "Okay, coming up, a secret from Elena's past resurfaces, and the fragile trust they've built will be tested in ways neither of them saw coming." It started with a phone call. Mid-January, late afternoon, Elena's phone buzzing in her coat pocket while she folded laundry. She glanced at the screen, saw the name of the memory care facility, and her stomach dropped. "Miss Ruiz, we need to discuss your mother's care plan. There's been an incident and we need to meet in person. Can you come in tomorrow?" She said yes because what else could she say? That night she barely slept. James noticed the next morning, saw the shadows under her eyes, the way her hands shook when she poured coffee. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing, just tired." "Elena." She closed her eyes. "My mom, there was an incident. I have to go see her. I'll drive you." "You don't have to. I want to." So he did. 2 hours north, through flat stretches of highway and small towns that all looked the same, neither of them saying much because some silences are too heavy for words. When they arrived, the facility was clean and sterile, and deeply, unbearably sad. A nurse led them to an office where a woman in a cardigan explained, in careful, clinical language, that Elena's mother had become aggressive, lashing out at staff, refusing medication, wandering the halls at night. They were doing their best, but her needs were escalating, and the cost of more intensive care was significant. Elena listened, nodding mechanically, and when the woman finished, she asked the only question that mattered. "How much?" The number was staggering, more than Elena made in 6 months. "Maybe more." "I understand this is difficult," the woman said gently. "We can discuss payment plans, but I need to be honest. If the balance isn't addressed soon, we may not be able to keep her here." Elena felt the world tilt. She thanked the woman, stood, and walked out of the office on legs that didn't feel like hers. James followed. He didn't say anything until they were back in the car. "Let me help," he said. "No." "Elena, please." "I said no." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. I can't take money from you. I can't be that person." "What person?" "The one who needs saving." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it anyway. "You're not asking me to save you," he said quietly. "I'm offering because I care. There's a difference." "Is there?" She looked at him, eyes wet and desperate. "Or is this just how people like you make people like me feel grateful? How you keep us small and manageable and in debt?" The accusation hit him hard, but he didn't let go of her hand. "I can't speak for everyone," he said, "but I can tell you what I feel. I feel like I've spent 41 years sleepwalking through my own life, and then you walked into it and woke me up. I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to be someone worth knowing, and if that means helping when you need it, then let me. Not because you owe me, because I want to." She stared at him, and something inside her cracked open. Something she'd been holding closed for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together." So she let him. Not all of it. She wouldn't take the full amount, insisted on a payment plan, made him promise it was a loan, not a gift. He agreed, even though they both knew he'd never ask her to repay it. And when they drove back to the city that night, something between them had shifted. The wall she'd built around herself was still there, but now there was a door, and he'd been invited in. Over the next few weeks, they grew closer in ways that felt inevitable and terrifying. He started coming home earlier, lingering in rooms where she worked, talking about things that mattered. She started staying later, finishing her tasks slowly, drawn to his presence in a way that scared and thrilled her. They talked about everything: his cold, distant childhood, her mother's illness, the small, sharp ways the world had shaped them. He told her about the pressure to be perfect, the weight of legacy, the loneliness of always being watched. She told him about growing up poor, about learning to be invisible, about the fear that no matter how hard she worked, it would never be enough. One evening in February, after she'd finished for the day and should have left, she found him in the library, staring at a chessboard set up on the side table. "Do you play?" he asked. "My dad taught me, before he left." "Want a game?" She should have said no, should have grabbed her coat and gone home. But instead, she sat down across from him, and they played. She won the first game, he won the second. By the third, they weren't really paying attention to the board anymore. They were just talking, laughing, existing in a space that felt separate from the rest of the world. When she finally stood to leave, it was past midnight. He walked her to the door, and for a moment, they stood there in the dim hallway, too close and not close enough. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me." He smiled, soft and sad. "Thank you for letting me." She left before she could do something foolish. But the whole bus ride home, she couldn't stop smiling. That's when the trouble started. The agency called her in for a meeting. Apparently there had been complaints, whispers really, about her spending too much time at the Calloway house, about inappropriate boundaries, about favoritism. Elena felt her stomach twist. She knew what this was. Someone had seen them together, had made assumptions, and now her reputation, her livelihood, was at risk. "We're not terminating your contract," the supervisor said carefully. "But we are reassigning you. Mr. Calloway's home will be serviced by someone else moving forward." Elena nodded, numb. "I understand." She didn't fight it, didn't argue, just accepted it and walked out, feeling like she'd been punched. She didn't tell James, didn't know how. But the next week, when a new person showed up at his door, he knew immediately. He called the agency, furious, demanding answers. They gave him vague, bureaucratic explanations. He called Elena. She didn't pick up. He went to her apartment, crossed the line he'd promised himself he wouldn't cross, and knocked until she answered. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "Because it doesn't matter." "Of course it matters." "No, James, it doesn't." She was shaking now, anger and hurt spilling over. "This is my life. This is what happens to people like me when we get too close to people like you. We lose our jobs, our reputations, everything. And you'll be fine. You'll move on. But I'll be the maid who got too familiar and no one will hire me again." "Then don't be a maid." The silence that followed was deafening. "What?" she whispered. "Work for me. Directly. Not through the agency. As my assistant. My partner. I don't care what we call it. Just don't disappear from my life because someone else decided you don't belong in it." "You don't understand." "Then help me understand. Tell me what you need, and I'll do it. Just don't walk away." She looked at him. This man who had somehow become the most important person in her world, and realized she was standing at a crossroads. She could protect herself, walk away, go back to being invisible and safe. Or she could take the risk, trust that maybe, just maybe, he was different. "I need you to mean it," she said finally. "Not just now, when it's easy, but when it gets hard, when people judge us, when your friends and your family look at me and see the help. I need you to mean it then too." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I mean it," he said. "I've never meant anything more in my life." And then, because some moments demand action, he kissed her. It wasn't a perfect kiss. It was desperate and uncertain, and full of all the things they'd been too afraid to say. But it was real. And when they pulled apart, breathless and wide-eyed, they both knew there was no going back. The truth always comes with a price, and over the next few months, Elena and James learned exactly how steep that price could be. His mother found out first, arrived unannounced one afternoon, took one look at Elena sitting at the dining table with her son, and her expression turned to ice. "We need to talk," she said, "alone." James refused. "Anything you want to say, you can say in front of Elena." His mother's gaze flickered to Elena. cold and assessing. You're making a mistake. People will talk. This will ruin you. Let them talk. She's using you. She's the only person in my life who isn't. His mother left in a fury, and though she didn't cut him off entirely, the relationship fractured in a way that would take years to repair, if it ever did. Friends distanced themselves. Colleagues raised eyebrows. The press, when they caught wind, had a field day. Billionaire and the Maid, a modern fairy tale or a PR disaster. But through it all, they held on. Elena went back to school part-time, studying literature. James restructured his company, stepping back from the day-to-day grind, focusing on projects that actually mattered to him. They moved into a smaller place together, still nice, but not a monument. Somewhere that felt like a home instead of a museum. Elena's mother passed away that spring. It was peaceful, the nurses said, and maybe that was true. At the funeral, James stood beside her, hand in hers, and didn't let go. Sophia gave a eulogy that made everyone cry, and when it was over, Elena realized that grief, for all its weight, was easier to carry when you didn't have to carry it alone. A year later, James proposed, not with a spectacle or a grand gesture, but quietly in the kitchen of their apartment, while she was making coffee and he was reading the news. "Marry me," he said, looking up from his tablet. She turned, spatula in hand, and laughed. "Are you serious?" "Completely. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "Then I'll do better." He stood, crossed to her, and took her hands. "Elena Ruiz, you are the bravest, kindest, most extraordinary person I've ever known. You didn't save me. You challenged me to save myself. And I don't want to spend another day of my life without you in it. So will you marry me?" She kissed him. And then, because she'd never been good at saying the easy thing, she whispered, "Ask me again in a year." He blinked. "What?" "I want to be sure. Not because I doubt you, because I've spent my whole life being careful, and I need to know that this, us, is something I'm choosing, not something I'm falling into." He smiled, slow and genuine. Okay. They got married 18 months later. Small ceremony, close friends. Sophia as maid of honor. And when Elena walked down the aisle, not in a designer gown, but in a simple dress she'd picked out herself, James cried. Because the woman coming toward him wasn't a maid or a project or a redemption arc. She was his partner, his equal. The person who taught him that love wasn't about saving or being saved. It was about showing up every day and choosing each other. Years later, when people asked how they met, Elena would smile and say, "He followed me home one night." And James would add, "Best decision I ever made." And they'd both be telling the truth, because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories don't start with grand gestures or perfect moments. They start with one person seeing another, really seeing them, and deciding that what they see is worth knowing, worth risking everything for, worth building a life around. And that, more than anything, is what redemption really looks like. So here's the question this story leaves you with. When was the last time you truly saw someone, not as a role or a function, but as a whole, complicated, beautiful person? And what did you do about it? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or remember something you'd forgotten, consider subscribing to Emotional Stories. We'll be here every week with more tales that remind us all what it means to be human.